Back to the Future, could it actually happen with a real time machine?
I was devastated. I thought if I could build a time machine that I could go back and see him again and tell him what was going to happen, maybe save his life. And so that became an obsession for me.
Back to the Future, could it actually happen with a real time machine? I was devastated. I thought if I could build a time machine that I could go back and see him again and tell him what was going to happen and maybe save his life. And so that became an obsession for me. In 2022, a man who had been missing for nearly 30 years suddenly appeared in rural Ohio. He was older, exhausted, stumbling, and he was not alone. His name was Mike Markham, a name that had become a legend in the 1990s after he claimed he had built a device in his garage that could make objects disappear. Then, one night in 1997, Mike himself vanished. No body, no trace, only a burned-out garage and a circular scorch mark on the concrete floor. For 29 years, that was where the story ended, until he came back. Mike Marcum described what had happened to him during those missing years. The story was frightening enough on its own, but what terrified the people who encountered him in 2022 was the thing that seemed to have returned with him: main content. Mike Markham grew up in Missouri with one obsession: electricity, magnetism, force fields, resonance. Anything that sparked, hummed, or vibrated could hold his attention completely. He had no degree, no laboratory, no funding, and no support from any institution. What he had was curiosity, a garage, and the dangerous confidence that appears in people who have taught themselves just enough to attempt things no one else would dare to try. In the early 1990s, he began building increasingly strange electrical systems from scavenged parts: industrial transformers, high-voltage capacitors, coils pulled from scrap yards, and control panels assembled from dismantled equipment. He read library books, technical manuals, fringe physics articles, anything he could get his hands on. At first, these were ordinary experiments. Then, one night, something happened that changed everything. He was working with a Jacob's ladder system, a high-voltage electric arc climbing between two angled metal rods. The experiment itself was not new. It was dangerous. But there was nothing supernatural about it. What made Mike's setup different was the way he operated it. He shone a laser through the path of the arc, changed the spacing between the metal rods, and adjusted the load on the transformer all at the same time. At a certain point, the electric arc began to behave differently. It was no longer chaotic. It tightened, became more stable, narrower, more focused. Then a metal object nearby flickered. It was not moved. It was not knocked over. It was not heated. It flickered, and for the briefest instant, it simply was not there. Then it came back. Same position, same angle, same object. Mike tried again. Washers, screws, bolts, coins, small objects placed near the field. Sometimes nothing happened. Sometimes they vibrated. And sometimes, for a fraction of a second, they vanished. No smoke, no sound, no explosion. Just a clean and impossible absence. He described the feeling inside the garage during those moments as wrong. The air became dense, charged, abnormal, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Living creatures reacted to it before he did. His dog, which used to sleep under the workbench every night, began refusing to cross the garage threshold. It would stand at the doorway, whine, and run away. Birds avoided the roof, and Mike himself noticed a phenomenon he could not explain through ordinary physics. During certain tests, the room became unnaturally quiet. It was not the silence of equipment being shut off. It was the silence of the world outside the four walls seeming to pause. That was the moment Mike stopped being an amateur tinkerer. In 1995, he called Coast to Coast AM, the late-night radio program hosted by Art Bell, famous for taking calls about UFOs, paranormal events, and fringe science. Art had heard many strange callers, but Mike sounded different. He did not sound like someone performing. He sounded tense, specific, focused, like a man saying something he knew sounded insane, but believed was true. Mike told Art that he had built a device in his garage capable of making objects disappear and then reappear. Art challenged him. How did he know they were truly disappearing? Could it have been nothing more than an optical illusion caused by the electric arc? Mike's answer made the story harder to dismiss. He said the field could be felt in the body. When the effect activated, the pressure in the room shifted, sound was suppressed, and animals reacted violently. The objects did not look hidden. They looked as if they had stopped existing. Art told him to document everything, bring in witnesses, and take careful measurements. Mike agreed, but what he did next showed that caution had disappeared completely. Mike believed he was standing on the edge of something enormous, and to push it further, he needed more electricity. Far more electricity. According to the story that spread in the months afterward, Mike stole industrial transformers from a local power station and integrated them into the system in his garage. When he powered the expanded setup, homes in the surrounding area began experiencing disturbances. Lights dimmed, electrical systems fluctuated. The disruption was large enough for authorities to trace the power anomaly back to him. He was arrested. For most people, that would have been the end. An amateur tinkerer arrested for stealing electrical equipment. The story should have stopped there, becoming a minor item in the local crime pages before being forgotten. But, for Mike, the arrest was not a stopping point. It was confirmation. He believed the reaction of the authorities, the urgency, the seriousness with which they treated a transformer theft was indirect evidence that he had touched something real. He used his time in prison to redraw field diagrams and revise his machine concepts. When he was released, he was not afraid. He became even more convinced that he had been delayed just before a breakthrough. And when he returned to his experiments, his claims escalated rapidly. He said the objects no longer merely flickered, now they disappeared for several seconds at a time. And sometimes, when they returned, they came back changed. A block of wood returned ice cold. A flower came back shriveled and brittle, as if more time had passed for it than for the room around it. Then came the claim that pushed everything into darker territory. Mike said he had tested the device on a living mouse. The mouse disappeared. When it came back, it was alive, but disoriented, terrified, and completely altered in its behavior. It spun in circles and no longer responded normally to any stimulus. It died not long afterward. Whether that story was true or exaggerated, it changed the tone completely. This was no longer a matter of garage experimentation. This was a man moving closer and closer to human testing. By late 1996 and early 1997, Mike no longer spoke like someone exploring a strange physical phenomenon. He spoke like someone staring into something he himself did not understand. He told Art Bell that the force field had grown large enough to affect his own body. He said he had stepped partly into it, and when he did, time seemed to behave strangely. Movement outside the field appeared to slow down. His own perception separated from the normal sequence of events. He described the experience as slipping between moments rather than moving through them. He was very careful with his words. He did not say, "I built a time machine." He said, "It behaves like a time machine." That distinction mattered, because Mike no longer believed the device was simply transporting matter. He believed it was altering the relationship between observation, motion, and time itself. Art urged him to stop working alone, to contact scientists, to bring in supervision. Mike refused. He became increasingly paranoid. He believed he was being watched by unfamiliar cars, strange people, and the growing feeling that once a person touched this kind of phenomenon, they were no longer invisible. Then he said he was close, very close. He promised to call back with proof. He never called back. In 1997, Mike Markham disappeared. His garage burned. Investigators found the device destroyed, with severe electrical damage throughout the site. There was a circular scorch mark on the concrete floor where the machine had once stood. No body was connected to the scene, no death was confirmed, no explanation was given. Mike simply vanished. The story split in two directions. One version claimed he had died in the fire, and the legend grew around the wreckage. The other claimed he had stepped into the machine and succeeded. Online forums, early internet archives, radio communities, and fringe research groups kept the story alive. Over time, it gathered every familiar layer: government cover-up theories, dimensional travel speculation, time loop claims, anonymous messages and photographs said to come from the wrong era. Most of it could not be verified, but one thing remained. The people who had heard Mike's voice on the radio, the way he spoke, the specific technical details, the clear tension in his voice, felt that he was sincere. And sincerity in stories like this is dangerous because it makes other people keep searching. 25 years passed in silence. Then, in 2022, the story surfaced again in a way that was much harder to ignore. A couple renovating an old farm in Ohio discovered a box hidden on the property. Inside were journals, diagrams, components, and technical notes, with dates that seemed to continue for years after Mike had disappeared. And on the box, according to the story that spread online, was the name Mike Markham. That alone was enough to reignite the legend. But then came the call. A man contacted the homeowners and claimed to be Mike Marcum. He said he knew they had found the box and asked whether he could come explain what had happened. When he arrived, he looked older than he should have. Not just aged, but worn down, as if the years had not passed normally for him. And according to the people who met him, something else felt wrong the moment he stepped into the house. The atmosphere changed. Not dramatically, not like a scene from a film. It was subtle, a coldness in certain corners of the room, silences that felt too deep, an instinctive urge that made both homeowners keep glancing over their shoulders as if Mike had not entered alone. For hours, Mike described what he believed the machine had really done. He said he had not traveled through time in the science fiction sense. He had fallen out of sync. He had not disappeared from the world. He had only shifted away from it, like a radio station drifting slightly off frequency, still close enough to exist, but too far away to come through clearly. He was still here, still on the same ground, beneath the same sky, inside the same timeline. But he existed on a wavelength no one could receive. After he fully stepped into the field in 1997, the world was still physically recognizable. The same roads, the same buildings, the same landscape. But something fundamental had changed in the way other people perceived his presence. They overlooked him, forgot him, could not hold him in memory. He was not invisible. It was something far stranger. He could be seen, but he could not be retained in the mind. Conversations slipped away from people. Encounters dissolved. Recognition never truly locked into place. He called it cognitive instability, as if human memory refused to anchor him. But that was not the part that frightened the couple most. What frightened them was what Mike said next. Eventually, he realized he was not alone in that state. There were others. At first, he thought the machine had affected only him. Then, during long periods of desynchronization, he began noticing figures at the edge of perception. People he would catch only briefly, standing too still in places where they should not have been. Hallways, empty lots, roadsides at night, reflections in glass, door frames. At first, they were never close. They were always watching, always slightly wrong. Their movements lagged behind. Their posture was unnatural. And Mike felt a deep physical dread that they recognized him the instant he recognized them. The deeper his condition progressed, the more often they appeared. Sometimes one, sometimes several. They never spoke. They only watched. He began to believe they were not hallucinations, and they were not ordinary people. He called them the others who had slipped away. According to Mike, the machine did not merely push a person out of phase with time. It exposed that person to a layer of reality inhabited by things that did not belong to ordinary perception. Some of them, he believed, might once have been human. Experimenters, accident victims, people who drifted too far out of sync and never found their way back. The others he was not sure about. And that uncertainty mattered. Mike insisted there was a clear difference between those who had been lost and the things that had never been human at all. He said that when a person falls far enough out of sync, they begin to notice presences lodged at the edges of the world, entities that seem to exist in the gaps of attention, in the blind spots of observation, in the instant before awareness becomes memory. You cannot look directly at them, but once you have seen them, they begin to appear more often, each time a little closer. Mike said he spent years avoiding them, constantly moving, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks, sleeping lightly, leaving any location the moment he felt the pressure in the room begin to change. He learned the rules through experience, not from books, but from nearly 3 decades of living out of phase. There were places where the barrier between normal perception and this other layer became thin. Areas with strong electromagnetic interference, abandoned industrial sites, old transmission corridors, certain isolated buildings, and even attics and basements, where forgotten things had remained still for too long. He said that in those places, he could feel their presence more clearly, as if he himself were being pulled deeper into their frequency. That was why he hid the box at the farm, not only to keep it safe, but to shield it. Then he said something that neither witness could ever push out of their mind. Those entities had begun following him, not all the time, only after he allowed himself to remain present before someone for too long. As if attention itself worked like a beacon. As if being remembered, even briefly, made it easier for them to find him. That was why he came in person only once. That was why he would not stay, and that was why he warned them not to search for him again, because if they did, something else might notice them too. The couple said Mike brought more than stories. He brought journals, field sketches, and warnings written in the frantic, disordered style of technical notes. There were diagrams of ring structures, stabilization arrays, and notes about observation thresholds, memory decay, biological stress, and what he called secondary presences. One line appeared again and again across different notebooks. "You are never the only thing looking back." Another note was even heavier. "The first machine opened the door. The later machines taught them where I was." Mike never clearly defined what they were, perhaps because he could not, or perhaps because once a thing can be defined, it can be thought about too clearly, and Mike seemed terrified of clarity. He repeatedly warned them not to recreate any version of the device. He said the greatest mistake was assuming the machine transported a body. It did not. It changed the conditions under which one mind could be located by other minds. That was what made it worse than time travel. Mike was not only risking where he was risking who or what might be able to find him. When Mike finally left, the couple said the strangest part of the night began almost immediately. Details about him began slipping away. His face became difficult to picture. His voice faded first, then the exact shape of his hands, the color of his jacket, the way he had stood in the doorway. They began writing everything down in panic because the memory seemed to be rotting in real time. But Mike was not the only thing they struggled to remember. They also began losing certainty about something else. How many people had been inside the house that night? At first, both of them insisted Mike had arrived alone. Then one of them remembered hearing a sound upstairs while Mike was in the kitchen. The other remembered, with rising fear, the sense of a figure briefly standing at the end of the hallway where no one should have been. Neither of them could fully reconstruct that moment, but both described the same terrible sensation. At some point during the conversation, they had looked past Mike and realized, for one impossible instant, that someone else was in the room behind him, not entering, not leaving, just standing there, motionless, silent, watching. When they later tried to describe the figure, they could not. Not because they had never seen it, but because the mind refused to hold it. That is what makes the story of Mike Markham different from every time travel legend ever told. The real horror is not that he disappeared. It is that he may have returned with proof that human perception is not a closed system, that there may be things existing around us that the ordinary mind cannot register. Not because they are hiding, but because the brain was never built to retain them. And Mike, through whatever he did in that garage, may have broken that filter forever. So, what really happened? Did he build a crude but genuine device capable of altering time, perception, or probability? Did decades of obsession fracture his identity and create a complex, contagious delusion? Did he vanish into a state suspended somewhere between observation and memory? Or did he open himself to something that had always been waiting just outside the frame? The question this story leaves behind is not whether time travel is real. It is not even whether a machine can move a body across years. The real question is whether reality contains things that the normal brain is protected from, simply because under ordinary conditions, no one becomes aware of them. And what happens when someone breaks that condition? Because if Mike Markham was telling the truth, the worst consequence of the machine was never disappearance. It was contact. He came back, but he came back changed, with eyes that had been forced to see the things the normal brain automatically filters out. And if the people who met him were right, he did not come back alone. Somewhere, perhaps even now, Mike Markham may still be moving. From one place to another, trying not to remain in sight for too long, trying not to let memory hold him in place, trying not to draw the attention of whatever began following him the moment he stepped into that force field in a garage in Missouri many years ago. A man broke reality, then came back with something reality was never supposed to let through.